So let's start. Today's presentation is going to be about different architectural styles that you can choose in Elixir. Let me start a presentation. All right. So Monolith and Umbrella is basically something that is particularly connected to Elixir. When you start a project like Phoenix, it's usually a monolith, but you can also create an umbrella apps, which is a concept within Elixir that groups a certain number of applications inside of it. And microservices is rather something general. So it's not really bounded to Elixir as a language, but rather it's a concept that you can use with any technology, tech stack you can think about. But we're gonna dive into it a little bit deeper very soon. Let's start with the context of the problem. Why it's so important to actually think through which of these you need in your project. The first thing is maintainability. So if you're thinking about your project long term and you would like to develop it within a couple of years, you have to think through how the maintainability aspect will look like in year 2 or 3. So if you choose poorly at the beginning, you can actually have a project that is unmaintainable, a project that where you want to add one simple feature, it will cost you 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And believe me, I've seen this kind of projects. It happens. So it's very important at the beginning of the project to really think through deeply what type of thing are you building and what type of team you have available for this project. Then the speed. So basically, if you choose the wrong tech stack and wrong architecture, you can actually have a bad performant application. So it can be very, the application you're building can be very time sensitive in terms of performance. And if you choose the wrong tech stack or wrong database, or you design the application the wrong way, it can not be as fast as possible. Scalability. In the context of Elixir, this is something that is very often a case. A lot of people are considering Elixir as a scalable alternative to other languages. So in the modern world, there is a need for a knowledge on how to scale applications. And if the application really needs a scale, usually it needs to scale very fast. So the scalability aspect is very important here. And you have to think about it at the very beginning of the project to choose properly, because as you will soon see, choosing wrongly here can impact this aspect very much. Productivity. So depending on which architectural style you'll choose, you can have a productive environment or not. And what I mean by productivity is mostly how fast you can develop a feature or application. So Ruby, for instance, was a language that was advertised as a very productive language. I consider Elixir as a productive language, but it's not only about the language itself, but also about how you will structure the app, how you develop it, because you can actually end up with not productive repository in a productive language. Inefficient resource utilization. So what I mean here is you can create an app that will run on several servers, for instance, and one of these servers will cost a lot of money. And it may turn out that the application that is running on this server doesn't really need that kind of hardware because it can run as well as as application of a very small instance. So depending on what you're going to choose here and how you're going to structure it, you can end up with inefficient resource utilization. Though I would say it's not the most important aspect of all of the problems I'll list here. Limited flexibility. Depending on which architectural style you will choose, you can have a flexibility to experiment with some parts of the application or not. And I would say that it's important, quite important at this point, to really think through whether you will need at some point this kind of flexibility. Onboarding, I guess all of you already had this case where you got into a specific repo that was very hard to understand, was very complicated. And these kind of repos are not only hard to understand by the newcomers, but it's also hard to describe what's going on in this kind of repo by the people that onboard you. So it's hard for both sides to do the proper onboarding. So choosing the right architectural style at the beginning can impact how fast you'll be able to onboard people. And deployment. Each of these has a specific possibilities on how you're gonna deploy the application and advancement on how hard it's gonna be to deploy the application. So it's really important to think this through because you'll have to keep in mind that Monolith will be deployed much differently than the whole microservices system. So I listed here eight things that came up to my mind when it comes to the context of the problem. Why do we need to think through which one we need at the beginning? So it's really a process when you start a project to take into account, because the wrong decision here can impact the whole development in upcoming years. All right, and we're gonna discuss three of them: Monolith, Umbrella Apps, and microservices. All right, so just to give a brief description what I mean by architectural styles. This is a high-level pattern or guideline for designing and organizing software systems. They describe the overall structure and relationships between components and serves as a blueprint for building applications. We're gonna start with the good old monolith. Good old because I think most of you or everyone here already had a chance to experiment with Monolith. So I'm gonna show you an example of how to create a monolith very fast with the Mix Phoenix new task. So on the right side, you can see what is the structure of the project that I consider a monolith of the Phoenix application. We have a lib folder, which holds essentially two folders. One is the monolith, which in the application is, in the context of this application, is a business logic folder, and monolith web, which will hold all of the web-related logic. So what are the benefits of the monolith? First of all, the simplicity. So having a one single code base simplifies the development process. You have basically everything in one place. What I mean by that is not that we have a real database within the code base itself, but all of the configuration files, all of the dependencies are listed within this one code base. So simplicity means that we aggregate everything in one repository. Fast initial development pace. So setting up a monolith requires less time and effort. And it's specifically important to have this possibility when you're at the very beginning of the project. So when you'd like to create a prototype or a MVP of the application, you need to be able to have a very fast initial development pace. Basically, you can start building features and functionality very quickly, which makes it a good fit for the early stages of the project. Then familiarity. So as I said, I'm quite sure that most of you here are familiar with monoliths. Monoliths have been there for a long time, so it's not like a new concept. It's not something that is actually specifically bounded to Elixir ecosystem. Monoliths can be created within Rails framework, can be created with Phoenix framework, and a lot of the developers already got familiar with this. So if you're forming up a team for a project, that is gonna be a project with the monolith approach, the very big chances are that most of the people within the team already are familiar with it. And with this also comes the thing that there's a lot of resources in the internet that explains how the monolith can be developed. Then we have easier dependency management. And what I mean by that is that it's not really about the fact that there's gonna be fewer dependencies. It's actually contrary. You're not gonna end up with fewer dependencies when you're doing the monolith approach. But when you use monolith approach, you list all of the dependencies for your project within one project, as opposed to what you're gonna see in umbrella apps as well as the microservices. It's very easy to have all of the dependencies listed in one place. Then updating the libraries and the language itself is a very easy thing because you have to do it in one place only. And it's quite easy to deploy monolith applications. So you can, I think that the fastest route right now can be to deploy it to Fly.io or Heroku. And it's usually like a 5 or 10 minutes work to be done. Of course, considering that your application is a very simple one. With more advanced ones, you probably have to configure a bunch of things still, but it's quite easy to deploy the monolith. But what are the disadvantages? The first thing is the mess. So I'm also quite sure that you already had a chance to see a monolith that is very hard to maintain because the development teams are lacking a perfect hygiene. What I mean by that, they don't really know how to maintain it. Sometimes there is no CI, which also implicates that we end up with the mess. So basically, we end up with a code base that is very hard to maintain, very hard to add new things, and there is a basically huge mess. And usually, one of the reasons why we have such a mess is a lack of modularity. So what I mean by that is that we have different components or services within the app that are very much coupled to each other, very much interconnected. So if you change one thing, you have to think about the other thing because you may break the other functionality. And it's not really a good thing, not only because of recompilation, but also because of just how hard it is to understand the whole system. So it's also a hard thing for the newcomers, for onboarding, etc. And here is one example of what I mean by that. For instance, we have a monolith application where we have a block context. Let's say it's a Phoenix app. And we have a create post function here. For some reason, we need to fetch user within this function. Don't ask me why, this is just an example. And the user has to be fetched through the account's context. So in this case, we create, we are coupling basically the block context with the account's context. And for a lot of developers, it's very hard to understand why do we actually have to fetch user within the other context, or sometimes it ends up in a situation where developers don't know where to search for a certain function because they don't know if it's defined within context A or B. Or for instance, a hardcore version, we have an account's context and someone is calling a controller function, which also leads to a lot of problems also related to, for instance, recompilation. Scalability limitations. So with Monolith, we end up with one release. So if you would like to scale a particular app or part of the app, basically, it's not very easy to achieve with Monolith. You still can build your application tree based on the environmental variable, for instance, but you'll still end up with a release that's containing the whole code, whole compiled code. And you can just disable specific applications to run under supervision tree. But it's not really like a thinner version of the app. It's still the big app, but just some parts of this app are running. So it's not really designed to do this kind of things. It's designed to be released as a one big release. Long recompilations. So with the growing project, it's getting longer to recompile or compile, basically. And also, here comes again the problem with the coupling. If you couple too much, you'll have a very long recompilation. And here is a real case scenario I sometimes see, like one simple change in config file, for instance, is causing almost 800 files to recompile. So you can imagine it takes a lot of time. And this is a problem because each recompilation like that takes a bunch of time from the development, from the time of the developer to focus on productive stuff. And sometimes it's like one small change, 1 minute of waiting or 30 seconds of waiting. So it's really an important issue to consider when you start in a project. And disadvantage 5, less flexibility. So it's basically hard to experiment with monoliths. Because basically you have a one big app, and if you want to, I don't know, update the Elixir version, you have to do it for the whole project, not like for one service within the microservices system. So it's less flexible. All right, so this is it for the monoliths. Then we're gonna go to Shiny Umbrella. We call it Shiny because it's very, a lot of developers consider this approach as something new, like let's say a superstar approach that can solve all of your problems. And as you will see soon, it has its benefits as well as disadvantages too. But let's start with the fact, let's start with the command that you can use to actually generate an Umbrella Apps project. So you use a normal mix new command, but you also pass an umbrella flag here. And on the right side, you can see the structure of the generated project. As you can see within the apps folder, there is nothing. So in order to create a new app within the apps folder, you basically go to apps folder and you place a new app in there, whether it's a mixed new app, some sort of the library, or it's a Phoenix application. So you basically use a normal mix generator here to create an app. And as you can see on the right side, I created here 2 apps to show that you can create as much apps as possible. So the benefits. It's easier to create a modularity and separation here, because umbrella apps are designed actually to be a separate applications. And as you could see by just a minute ago, you have to create a new mix app within the umbrella to have an app. So it's easier to follow the modular approach here and to separate the applications within the umbrella. Okay. In the monolith, you could, for instance, have a different context like accounts, a blog. Maybe in umbrella app, it's gonna be a separate application. So it's harder to couple 2 applications than couple 2 modules within the monolith. Better scalability, because essentially in Umbrella, you can create a different releases. So depending on your project needs, you can scale the given release and keep the second release on the scale as it used to be. So in this example, in the scope of the Umbrella app we generated just a few slides before, you can see that there is a releases key within the project where you can pass the name of the release. So we have 2 releases here, up and up to. And you pass applications that should be considered when building the release. So this is what you can do in Umbrella. Then we have a better flexibility, because essentially having a separate apps allow you to experiment more. And as a side note, I think that the most tempting benefit is actually this one, for tempting for the developers who consider choosing Umbrella. So they believe that there is a clear constraint between the apps within the Umbrella, and they think this will solve the problem they have with the lack of modularity, with the lack of separation within the monolith approach. So that's, I think, the most popular belief in the Elixir ecosystem about the umbrellas. But here comes the disadvantages. So what are the disadvantages of this shiny umbrella approach? First of all, I think that umbrella apps end up being coupled after all. So with the side note I had that it's very tempting for developers to choose Umbrella because they think it's gonna create a separation and modularity. I've never seen Umbrella apps project where one app would not be dependent on the other one. Like, even there would be like an 8 apps within the umbrella, at least 2 of them would be somehow connected. What I mean by this is that you essentially need one app to build the other, because the other uses the first app somehow. So most umbrella apps end up being coupled after all, but this time as dependencies. So it's not really like calling a different module, let's say accounts context within the blog context, but right now it's like calling accounts app within the blog app. All right. So devs usually use it like a monolith, but pack it as an umbrella design. And here is an example of how you fetch the dependency in Umbrella. So if your app needs an app one, you can specify this in the depths, and you have to pass this in Umbrella option here. And then the mix will know that the app one dependency that you're trying to use here is actually defined within the Umbrella. The second thing is dependency issues. So if you want to generate one release containing two apps, you must resolve any dependency issues clashes. So let's consider this case. App 1 has Ecto version 3.8. App 2 has Ecto version 2.0. To generate a release that needs both App 1 and App 2 to run, you will need to somehow resolve the different versions issues the compiler will have to actually compile the project, to fetch the dependencies actually at the beginning. So although the apps are separated, it doesn't mean that you don't have to take into account that these apps can have different versions of the same libraries. Because essentially what you're doing is you're combining these apps into releases. So it's kind of a thing that not every developers take into account when they jump into Umbrella. They sometimes even don't know that this kind of thing can happen because they think these apps are totally separate, okay? And it's not true if you consider that they have to resolve the dependencies, that, for instance, they can cross-reference each other. And the next disadvantage, they have one config. So separate apps, but one config. Okay? Why? Let's take a look at the config file that's generated in the Umbrella apps project. And I'll read the text that is in the line 5. Note that all applications in your Umbrella share the same configuration and dependencies, which is why they all use the same configuration file. If you want different configurations or dependencies per app, it is best to move said applications out of the Umbrella. So one config, resolving dependencies, and often cross-referencing but for dependencies, all right? Then we have a potential over-engineering. So I've seen this too, that sometimes developers are choosing Umbrella and they start to spawn a lot of different apps. You can have one app for API, you can have one app for the web, you can have one app for the admin panel, for instance, and you end up with a lot of apps that in most cases can be actually one app. And it wouldn't actually hurt the whole project to have one app that serves as the web server. Because for instance, if you have a free web apps within the Umbrella, you have to somehow proxy all of them, because you have to somehow fix the conflicting paths, or you'll have to serve them somewhere on different ports. So if you have a couple of web apps defined with Umbrella, what is usually done is creating yet another app to serve all of them, to proxy them. So there are a lot of actual problems with doing these kind of things. So it leads to over-engineering, okay? So some apps don't really need that much of modules, separate modules, because they simply don't need this because two apps can be one app, and that will be okay because the context is very similar. So potentially a bunch of over engineering happening in umbrella apps. And it requires a high level of skill set. I think it requires high level of skill set in Elixir in particular. Maybe not even skill set, but maybe experience in Elixir and understanding what's going on here. Because you create different releases, you have to know how to handle the dependencies clashes and etc. etc. So there is gonna be a lot of extra work you'll have to do it to maintain this kind of repository. So I think if you haven't tried out the umbrella yet and you're facing you'll have to choose for the next big project whether it's going to be Monolith on umbrella. First try out the umbrella if you really want to make the decision, because I mean, try out on some kind of hobby project, right, or something smaller to actually see what's the overhead here. What would you have to know? How you have to handle this, because it's not like a normal monolith application. And I'll share with you some kind of a community perspective here as well. Biased a little bit, but let's see. First one is actually Sasha Juric, who was a speaker once here on our meetups. He was doing a Q&A actually, and Sasha is a well-known Elixir expert, consultant. So it's taken from his Twitter. If you want to see this tweet, you can just type this into Google and you'll find this very quickly. So Elixir tip of the day: avoid umbrella apps. You're welcome. All right. Within this thread on Twitter, you can actually see a bunch of people arguing whether it's true or not, and Sasha trying to answer. And I tend to agree with Sasha actually on this topic. After seeing a lot of different umbrella apps, I kind of believe that he's true. And I think the reason why is the second screenshot here. And it's from author, I don't know who he is, but I found it on Reddit. So in my experience, if you're 143% sure that will benefit from umbrella app, then there is an 18% chance that you're right. It's kind of what I observe usually, because I've seen a couple of umbrellas, and I really think that the team wanted to achieve something different than eventually happened because of this decision. All right. So this is a community perspective. And let's go to microservices. So microservices, as I said, is not a concept that is bounded to Elixir. This is a general concept that where you have a bunch of applications, smaller applications, microservices running. And each of these service can actually be represented by different language or stack, right? And what you have to do in the end is somehow connect all of these services through a common protocol. It can be, for instance, HTTP or another protocol where you're gonna communicate with all of the services. But one important thing is that it's not bounded to Elixir. You can choose whatever technology you can think of. And the benefits here are modularity. This is designed to be a modular approach, I think. Though you can still create a monolith mess, let's say, within one of these services. The concept is to have smaller applications, each of them serving a specific purpose or specific context of the whole system. And basically, the concept itself supports modularity and separation. All right, even more than Umbrella Apps, because Umbrella Apps is still one repository. Keep in mind that it's still one repository. MicroServices will probably be a couple of repositories. In most cases, at least it is. This is like it is in most cases. Flexibility. Each service is a different app, so it's up to you what tech stack you'll use, how you'll deploy it, how you'll maintain the code, all right? And each team can work on its own service and don't interrupt the other one, all right? So it can actually be maintained differently across teams. Each service can be maintained differently. As long as the services can interact with each other and the protocol is there, the shared management, the state management is proper, but we'll get to this soon. Parallel development, all right? So as I said, there are a couple of teams. They can work on its own service. So basically that's a kind of a great thing here. And Umbrella, you still can do it too, but you still can end up with bigger problems to maintain the one repository. Easier maintainability. So yeah, this is, I think, something I already covered. It's easier to create a maintainable code in microservices approach because if you, for instance, have to refactor something, it should be smaller than Monolith and Umbrella, all right? Or you can replace a given service with yet another service that is written in different language. You don't have this kind of flexibility in for instance, Monolith. A better fault isolation. So basically, if one service fails, it is less likely to impact the entire system. So this is also kind of a benefit here. But also there are of course, disadvantages in microservices too. And for sure, one of the biggest ones is that the complexity increases a lot, all right? So things like service orchestration, inter-service communication that I already mentioned, distributed system management, and state management. These kind of things are happening here, and these kind of things requires from your team to have a specific skill set, all right? Handling infrastructure. As I said, in Monolith, even in Umbrella, it's quite easy to pack the release and deploy it. Here, you're probably going to have to somehow pack a couple of releases, a couple of potentially different frameworks, languages to run on the infrastructure. Shared state management. So sooner or later, your microservices will need some kind of synchronization. So you'll have to have state management, which is not really that easy. Handling communication. Whenever you need to communicate one app with another, you have to come up with a certain protocol to be used. Either it's HTTP or some kind of message quiz or even database listeners. It's up to you how you're going to manage the communication between the apps. Handling tech updates. All right, this is both advantage as well as disadvantage, because essentially, if you want to have, I don't know, 5 microservices all running on Elixir, and you would like to just update one of these services, you can do it. All right. This is not a problem in microservices. It's a problem in Monolith. It's a problem in umbrella apps, because in umbrella apps you have to still you're updating basically all of the applications when you want to update Elixir. So you can do it here. It's possible. But also, if you would like to update all of the apps at once, it's not possible. You have to, for instance, if you have 10 Elixir services, you have to update all of them. All of them have to have a git commit and release. So it's a painful thing to do. And from my perspective, the most important one, your team needs an expertise, because all of the things that I just mentioned can be handled pretty quickly if your team is very skillful. All right, if the skill set is there, it is there. So if you feel like you're really expert in it, you tried it a couple of times and you know how to do it, or at least you have senior developers in the team who already did it and can guide you through it, then it's possible it's not gonna be a painful thing. But keep in mind that this really requires an expertise. So if you're going for this approach for, let's say, MVP project, and you never tried it, and the MVP is for the startup that raised some money and they need something fast, the chances are you're gonna have a problem, because it's a totally different thing to develop Monolith at the beginning or the microservices. So summing up these approaches, I'm gonna sum this up in 4 ways. First of all, ease of use. It's very easy to start with and build something with Monolith. So I'm gonna go with Monolith here. If you don't agree with me at any point, I would love to see that on chat. So I think the second one is Umbrella and the third one is microservices. When it comes to maintainability, I think it's long-term, okay? Long-term. It's easier to maintain microservice approach than Monolith. I think it's Monolith at the second place, because eventually whoever tried Umbrella here at least once or twice, you probably know that there are a bunch of problems you have to resolve on the way that you didn't expect at the beginning. So I think long term, Monolith can be easier to maintain if you'll use a specific set of rules that should be applied to Monolith to maintain the good health of the repository. All right. If you follow these rules, then it's okay. And I'm gonna come back to this at the end. Then we go to flexibility aspect. And I think microservices win here as well, because you can really experiment. You can change things, and it's like replacing one specific app within the whole bunch of apps. So it's quite flexible long term. Umbrella at the second place, because you can still experiment with one of the apps, and it's harder definitely in Monolith. And time to market, which is a very important aspect, because developers sometimes forget that our job is to actually run the code that is useful for the use case of the project, usually a business related things. All right. So the time to market aspect is very important. We want to build something fast. The users needs to test it, needs to give us feedback, we may need to replace a bunch of things within the code base because the application may not be that useful as we thought. So time to market is a very important aspect of it, right? So I think Monolith wins here because it can do things fast at the beginning. Then I think Umbrella, and then microservices. But still, it also depends on the skill set of your team, okay? But I think usually Monolith is the most common one when it comes to time to market aspect. So when to use a monolith? I think you should use monolith when the speed of development matters. So especially at the very beginning of the project, if you're not sure if it's gonna be a very big project or you just don't want to create something big, then you can go for a monolith. When your team is not experienced with microservices, okay, as I said, it's a very important aspect. When your team is not experienced with microservices or even umbrella apps, you should go for monolith because otherwise you can have a problem. When you're looking for a product market fit, MVP stage, right? Sometimes even at the MVP stage, you're building something big, but it's just a smaller percentage of the projects. Most of the cases, you're building something to show to the very early adopters to verify the product market fit, and you want to do it fast. So I think for most cases, monolith to verify the product market fit would be the way to go. Umbrella, when you're 1000% sure your apps are not coupled. I think this is something connected to what I showed you before, the screenshot. When you're really sure that your apps are not coupled, probably you're still wrong, but when you're really sure, then you may go for an umbrella. Or when you need a multiple releases for specific scalability reasons or just any other reasons you have. If you want to do it with Elixir, you can choose umbrella apps. I would personally, in both cases, still rather pick separate apps for both of these, but I don't really think that like it's not suited for any project. I still think there are use cases for umbrella apps. I strongly believe in it, but from my perspective, with the experience I have so far, and a bunch of projects I've seen in Umbrella, and a bunch of projects seen in Monolith, most of the umbrellas were getting into some kind of mess after all. So it's really important to think through whether you're really sure that you need umbrella. And microservices, when you're 1000 sure you're building something big in terms of complexity, these kind of projects happens because you're building something for a big company, internal, for instance, to handle some very complex stuff and big stuff. Or your app is already too big, considering the team size and the complexity of the product, and you'd like to create a separate apps from it, for instance, Monolith, to support the further growth and make it easier to maintain. Or if your team is very experienced, so even at the MVP stage, they can operate very fast. So my personal favorite approach for most cases would be to start with a monolith, but with a very well maintained and defined context and boundaries. That's very important because otherwise you still have a problem. With monolith, you end up with unmaintainable code after a couple of years if the project is doing well. Because if you don't have a proper hygiene in the project, there's a lot of connections between the contexts and modules, and you don't want that. So for this, I'm finishing a library that will support this process to be very productive and maintainable. So if you're interested in having something that is going to be very easy to integrate to your project, and you'll be able to maintain a clean and not coupled context, you can subscribe to our newsletter. That's why I've put the button on top of this presentation here, because we are for sure going to publish this on newsletter. And I think it's gonna be ready in around two weeks. Just finishing this up and writing documentation. So if you're also looking for this kind of a tool that will support monolith development with a very well defined context and boundaries, you can sign up to the newsletter or just observe us or on the social channels. It's kind of the thing that Sasha Jurich has with his boundary library, but it's specific for context. And there are a couple of small additions there that makes it also more interesting for this particular use case. So the first, I would go for this, and then once the app is too big to handle, I would create a microservices based on this context. And that's it. Thank you very much. I hope I shed some light on this topic for you, and I still believe that there may be a lot of people who disagrees with some things I said, because this is really like a topic where there's a lot of preferences. In each developer has preferences, but I'm speaking mostly from the experience, from what I've seen on the projects and from the community. So thank you very much.